Welcome back. The participation of Chinese companies at the Consumer Electronics Show, or CES, one of the world's biggest tech shows, dropped again in 2020. The four-day show kicked off on Tuesday and attracted more than 4,400 exhibitors from around the world. The Telegraph reported that the presence of Chinese companies has fallen by more than 100 compared to last year, and around 1,100 took part this year, significantly down on 2018, when around 1,500 Chinese companies attended the show. And meanwhile, Apple is officially returning to the CES for the first time in 28 years to discuss its stance on consumer privacy rather than pitch a new product. So what tech trends have been unveiling at the CES? And what do the following numbers tell us about the landscape in China? And what's the future for China-U.S. tech cooperation? Well, I'm now joined from Washington, D.C. by James Early, CEO of Stansberry China, and Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So now in 2019, 20% fewer Chinese companies participated in the CES compared to 2018. As we mentioned, the Telegraph reported that the number continued to decline by more than 100 companies this year, down to around 1,100 from around 1,200 last year. Mr. Gao, let me start with you. Why are fewer Chinese companies attending?
Well, first of all, CES is one of the highest profile and most prominent consumer electronics exhibitions in the whole world. It's highly recognized, and in China there is a very large demand for participation in this summit meeting. On the other hand, in the past 2 years or so, there has been increasing politicization of electronics by the U.S. government, to the extent that certain Chinese companies have been blacklisted and subject to sanctions, for example. And also a visa issue is becoming more and more of a problem. Some of the exhibitors and those who want to participate in the conferences find it difficult to line up visa in a timely manner, and the bad word spread around. And I think this served to dampen the enthusiasm among the Chinese corporates for the CES exhibition in the United States. This is not good for the Chinese companies, but also this is a great loss to the meeting organizers and also to the consumer electronics industry in the whole world. So I hope political environment will improve and there will be less politicization in electronics going forward, and more Chinese companies will re-engage with CES in the coming years.
Well, we have to point out, while fewer Chinese companies are showcasing this year, some big names are still attending, and these include consumer electronics brands like Hisense, electronic vehicle startup Byton, or drone maker DJI. Huawei is also on the exhibitor list. So, Mr. Early, China still represents the largest non-U.S. delegation at the CES. What does that tell us about China-U.S. business interactions? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is still structurally optimistic. Out of 4,500, 1,200 or 1,100 are Chinese. That's still really huge, and it speaks to the volume, speaks to the importance of U.S.-China trade. So I'm still an optimist here on this. I mean, it's easy to take the negative side and say, yeah, they're down by a couple hundred, and that's a bummer. And it is a bummer, because shifting from politics to business, I agree with the former point that I would love to see more interaction here, politics aside, but I still think there's a lot of good going on between the U.S. and China, and that's why I'm hopeful that things get resolved relatively soon and relatively smoothly.
And Mr. Gao earlier mentioned the visa issue, the visa restrictions faced by a lot of Chinese exhibitors. Nikkei, Japan's leading business newspaper, actually reported that this is a major factor discouraging Chinese companies from attending. Visa approvals from the United States, especially for individuals who work in China in sensitive fields such as artificial intelligence or semiconductors. Mr. Early, are these worries from the U.S. side justified? I mean, how can these concerns be addressed?
Well, in terms of how they can be addressed, it's probably above all of our pay grade here. This is between two governments, but I certainly hope this tit-for-tat visa issue can be resolved quickly. I personally don't see a major, and I'm not an expert on IP theft in the consumer electronics industry, but I don't see a major risk in industry participants or engineers attending a trade show for consumer products that are going to be released and sold on the market soon anyway. You know, maybe I'm lucky I have a 10-year visa to China still. I'm thankful for that, but I hope that this visa aspect of what's going on between the U.S. and China gets resolved too, because I don't see a huge risk for the show.
All right, and according to South Korea's Pulse News, the number of South Korean exhibitors at the CES is the largest ever and up nearly 31% compared to last year, ranking third behind China and the U.S. How are Asian companies driving global innovation? What are the bigger picture here, Mr. Gao?
Well, I would say East Asia, including countries and regions like China, Japan, South Korea, and China's Taiwan province, are the most dynamic and vibrant cluster of producers and spare parts manufacturers for the consumer electronic products in the whole world. And I think the China market in particular is not only the largest in size, but also is becoming more and more sophisticated. Technological breakthroughs are coming in. Many of the U.S. products are actually assembled here in China, including almost all the Apple products for the consumers market. Therefore, I think try to engage with East Asia in general, but the Chinese producers and the vendors here in the electronics market will be crucially important for CES to become sustainable going forward in the coming years and decades. And China is really leading in many ways in the consumer electronics products in particular, and I hope relations between China and the United States can be improved in the coming years, and the uncertainty and unpredictability that many other manufacturers and the vendors now in China face in accessing the U.S. market, in accessing the exchange of products and technologies between the two countries will be reduced, because this will be good for China, but also, allow me to emphasize, this will be equally good for the American producers.
Certainly a very hopeful note. But speaking about the products that are generating a buzz on the tech scene at this moment, the Consumer Technology Association, which organizes this show, the CES, unveiled the Trends to Watch list on Monday, and 5G is one of the highlights. It predicted that the number of 5G handsets shipments is expected to spike over the next several years. I mean, how rapid, Mr. Early, will the further rollout of 5G be in 2020, and what kind of measures could promote quicker 5G expansion globally?
Well, I mean, we're still a couple of years away from kind of the real use cases that 5G is supposed to bring, you know, the Internet of Things, digitizing everything. This is a case where China is honestly quite ahead of the U.S., and not so much for tech reasons, but for regulatory reasons as well. In China, a decision can be made and the whole country starts to move on 5G. In the U.S., 5G is regulated individually by 50 different states, and that has materially slowed adoption. The U.S. is trying to catch up now, but it's still lagging.
Yeah, it's not only just the U.S., some European countries too. I mean, Chinese ambassador to the U.K., Liu Xiaomin, said on Sunday that banning Huawei means backpedaling for Britain, which would leave the country trailing behind on technology. Huawei also remains on the U.S. entity list. What's the diagnosis for Huawei when it comes to driving the global development of 5G in 2020, Mr. Gao?
Well, when we talk about the 5G, there are at least two dimensions to it. One is the 5G backbone network, for example, which is the crucial thing. But secondly, equally, if not more importantly, that is all the applications built upon the 5G backbone network, and including consumer electronics, including the 5G smartphones and all the applications that come along with it. I would say Huawei is a leading global company, and in many respects it is very much a pride of China's manufacturing and electronics industry, but also it is a very international company. I don't think any country in the world has any justification or any legitimate reason to ban Huawei. Why banning Huawei? Simply on the one-sided a very highly prejudiced accusation of one single government in the country, which is really arms twisting. Many other governments try to force them to fall in line with that particular country. No, I think this will be bad for that country which wants to ban Huawei, because it will not only slow down the backbone rollout for the 5G network, it will also slow down the introduction of the applications which will be built upon the 5G backbone network. It will be a double loss for those countries which really want to follow the suit of that major power, which does not have any particular justification to clamor to ban Huawei.
And another major player here, Apple, I have to mention this. This is another notable event. Apple's returning to the CES after 28 years. And rather than to pitch a new product, Apple's first appearance in decades is to discuss a stance on consumer privacy. The company's senior director of privacy, along with other executives from Facebook, Procter & Gamble, and a commissioner from the Federal Trade Commission, would discuss how companies build privacy at scale in accordance with regulation and consumer demands. Mr. Early, how are you looking at this? I mean, as technology continues to advance, what are the consequences will it have on privacy for consumers both in China and globally?
Well, it's funny, Apple's reason for attending CES is not as exciting as a product, or it's not like Elon Musk dancing in that video that's all over my WeChat now, but this is still a technical issue that's very important. After Cambridge Analytica came out, after the elections in the U.S., it kind of woke Americans up to the fact that, wow, this is like modern day weaponry. In the old days, we had muskets, and Americans still have the right to bear arms, but now we've got rocket launchers and much more powerful weapons that the average person can't have. And that's kind of a weird parallel, but I think the same thing is evolving in technology. We're realizing that with small changes or occasional bad actors or good people who do bad things sometimes, mistakes happen, right? And that can have a huge consequence with IT when we have data. So I think the industry is trying to wake up and police itself as fast as it can before it gets policed by someone else. I don't think it's going to succeed.
They're going to need to take more responsibility. We're going to have to go. Thank you very much, James Early, CEO of Stansberry China, and Victor Gao,